Two surveyors on two different continents who never met and never communicated wrote almost the same sentence about the forests they were walking through. One was in England, one was in the Congo. Both said the same thing. This doesn't look natural. That sentence is where this story starts. And once you follow it, you end up somewhere the official record doesn't want to go. In 1817, a British surveyor working the Dean Plateau wrote in his field notes that he had spent 3 days walking through what he called an arrangement of trees so convenient to the traveler that one begins to suspect the hand of man in the placement of each species. In 1832, a French naturalist writing from the interior of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo noted an almost impossible abundance of fruit-bearing trees, nut-bearing trees, and medicinal plants occupying the same ground in an order that no accident of nature could produce. Read that phrase again, an order that no accident of nature could produce. These men never met. They worked on different continents, in different ecosystems, writing in different languages. They had no reason to produce similar observations, and yet they were describing the same thing. Either that is a remarkable coincidence, or it is evidence of something real. The deeper pattern goes further than two men. Between the 1790s and roughly the 1860s, survey after survey from 4 different continents returned with versions of the same description. Forests that didn't match the word wilderness. Forests that were layered, stacked, diverse in ways that pure ecology couldn't produce. Forests full of species that were useful, that bore food, that clustered in combinations that suggested someone had once made deliberate decisions about what grew where. And then, within a compressed window of roughly 70 years, most of it was gone. Not through gradual deforestation, not through slow climate change. Gone in decades, cleared fast enough that the transition barely registers as a distinct event in the official record. That timeline is where the question lives. Let's start in England because England gives us something useful: documentation. Most people know the term royal forests and assume it means hunting grounds. Kings, deer, aristocratic privilege. That's part of the story. But look at what the law actually said. The forest laws of Norman England, documented in the Domesday Book of 1086, and the forest surveys that followed it, covered at their peak somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the entire country, and the penalties for violating them were extraordinarily severe. Blinding, mutilation, execution, not for taking deer. The restrictions went much further. You couldn't take timber, you couldn't clear land, you couldn't farm inside the royal forests, or graze livestock, or build structures. The restrictions were about preserving the totality of the ecosystem, and what could be taken legally were things called common rights: common of mast, common of pannage, common of estovers. The mast, acorns, beechnuts, chestnuts, hazelnuts. The estovers, carefully calibrated rights to take certain branches without destroying the tree. These weren't hunting grounds, not primarily. They were managed food systems, and the laws around them were designed, whether intentionally or not, to prevent their destruction. Then came the Enclosure Acts. Between roughly 1750 and 1850, in wave after wave of parliamentary legislation, the common forests and commons of England were systematically privatized, cleared, and converted to agricultural monoculture. Millions of acres within 2 generations. A food system that had sustained rural populations for centuries, in some cases for millennia, was dismantled, fenced off, and plowed under. The official story is modernization, efficiency, progress. But look at what replaced it. Not a better food system, a more controllable one. A system that required seeds to be purchased, land to be rented, labor to be sold. A system in which no one could simply walk into a forest and eat. Cross the Atlantic now. Before European contact, the indigenous peoples of North America maintained food production systems of extraordinary sophistication. The Kalapua of the Willamette Valley burned their landscapes on precise cycles to manage the growth of camas bulb meadows and oak groves. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy practiced companion planting at landscape scale, maintaining extensive food forests of nut-bearing trees, berry thickets, and medicinal plants that buffered and supplemented agriculture across vast territories. The early European observers who encountered these landscapes were almost universally confused by them. They described the American landscape as park-like, as if someone had designed it, as if someone had maintained it, which of course someone had, for thousands of years. The first British colonial administrator to formally document the Carolina Piedmont in the late 1600s wrote about groves of pecan, walnut, and chestnut trees so well spaced and tended that an Englishman might mistake the whole for an orchard of great age. He was almost certainly right. It was an orchard, a food forest maintained across generations by people who understood, as the European newcomers did not, that you could tend a landscape without fencing it, without owning it, without destroying it to use it. Now go further south. In the Amazon basin, researchers have been finding something that doesn't fit standard ecological models: terra preta, Amazonian dark earth, patches of extraordinary fertile soil, black with charcoal and organic material, dotting the Amazon basin in concentrations that track suspiciously well with pre-Columbian settlement patterns. Terra preta is not natural. It is made, a specific combination of charcoal, bone, manure, and organic waste incorporated into thin tropical soils over generations to build a growing medium that doesn't degrade. That's not the strange part. The strange part is the species growing in and around the terra preta deposits. Brazil nut trees, RC palms, peach palms, cacao. Species that archaeologists and ecologists now believe were deliberately cultivated at landscape scale across a territory that once held, by some estimates, tens of millions of people. An Amazon that was a garden, not a wilderness, a garden, and the people who maintained it are gone. Their populations collapsed within decades of first contact with European disease, and the garden grew over, and the forest closed in around it. And within a few generations it looked, to European eyes, like untouched wilderness. The same pattern, a food system, a collapse or clearance, a transition so fast that what replaced it barely needed to acknowledge what it had replaced. Here's the part that changes the question. In England today, in the Welsh borders, in parts of Ireland, if you walk the ancient field boundaries, the deep lanes, the sunken roads lined with old trees, the hedgerows that predate every map, you find something: hazel, crabapple, elder, wild plum, cobnut, sweet chestnut, mulberry, species that don't colonize together naturally, species that require planting, in combinations that suggest someone knew exactly what they were doing. These hedge systems are conservatively several hundred years old, some may be much older. They are, in the view of the researchers who study them, the encoded memory of a planting system. The food forest contracted to a linear form as the open forests were cleared, preserved in the margins because the margins were the last places the enclosures reached. A compressed survival, a whisper of the original, and even these are disappearing. In Britain throughout the 20th century, thousands of miles of ancient hedgerow have been removed per decade. The official reason: agricultural efficiency. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Somewhere right now, in a forest you're not allowed to enter, there are trees that were planted by people whose names we don't know, using techniques we've forgotten, as part of a system we've lost the language to describe. They're still producing food, they're still standing. The question isn't whether a more sophisticated relationship between human beings and forest food systems once existed. The botanical surveys, the soil science, the species distributions, the hedge ghosts. They're enough to establish that something was there. The question is simpler and more devastating than that. Who decided you shouldn't have it? Not why, not when, not under which legal or political framework the decision was formalized. Who decided that a system of food production requiring almost no labor, no purchased inputs, no centralized infrastructure, a system that made ordinary people substantially self-sufficient from the land wherever they lived, who decided that this was the thing that needed to go? And what does it mean that we live, right now, in the world they built instead? The forest was there, the knowledge was there, the system was there, and then, in the space of a single human lifetime, across every continent on Earth, it was gone. Find me a natural explanation for that. Find me an official one. I'll be here waiting. If this is a story you've never heard, you already know what to do. Subscribe and go find the next file they didn't want opened.